So welcome everybody. Thanks very much for joining on what is going to be the last of this sort of spring series of webinars. We will be doing some more in the autumn, and we've got, I think, 3 speakers lined up already. If any of you have any bright ideas about who you might like to hear from, then please do drop me a line, and we'll see if we can secure your favoured speaker. So tonight we're going to hear from Sue Loach, and this has been kind of promoted as basic husbandry for welfare. So if you're looking for sort of very advanced material, you're in the wrong place, but I'm sure we'll all learn something new as we go along anyway. And thanks very much to Sue for putting this together. She's not kind of a regular performer, so she's had to make this presentation from scratch. So we look forward to hearing from you. So over to you.
Thank you, Duncan. Well, I suppose I better start off by just sort of saying who I am and what I know, I guess. I've had alpacas for 16 years and sort of bred them quietly. Well, some people would say quietly, other people would say I'm not so quiet. And over the years, I think I've gathered bits of information that I find useful, and a lot of information that I've accumulated from other breeders and that sort of thing. I would say that anything I say in this presentation is based on personal experience, and I would never ever recommend that you do anything or use any product without checking it out with a vet first. I'm not qualified to prescribe anything. I can advise you as to what I've done, but clearly you would always need veterinary advice. When I started breeding, I remember it vividly. I bought 6 pregnant females, turned up in the field one day, one had had a cria. I phoned my breeder and he went, spray its cord and walk away. At which point I realised that I didn't actually know what to spray a cord with. I've bred dogs for years and shown dogs and had animals. I didn't know what to spray a cord with because I just hadn't bothered to research. I just assumed that everything would be okay. So I do think that all of us would benefit from learning as much as we can about these animals. So when I was asked to do this webinar, I'm not a regular performer and it's not something that I would historically do. I'd got this brilliant idea that I was going to go up into the field and I was going to do you lots of nice videos as to how we do things. And unfortunately, my first attempt at a toe trimming video ended up with my usually very obliging stud male deciding that actually he didn't want his toenails cut that day. My daughter ended up sitting in the food trough and I ended up with a lead rein in my hand and no alpaca. So doing videos, I decided perhaps wasn't best. So I thought we won't reinvent the wheel and we'll go with pictures. What you will find in the bottom of your right-hand side of your screen by the BAS logo as we go on, there are references to Alpaca Society welfare sheets. They are all on the Alpaca website. They're in the public domain under Alpacapedia. You can download any of them. You can give them to customers. They are all referenced. So if you want any information, please use them. You know, BAS have put them there for a reason and they're there for you to use. They're much more detailed than this husbandry course. That they refer to quantities of drugs and all sorts of things, but they're really, really useful. I apologise in advance if some of this is too basic for some or too advanced, but please feel free to answer questions and you know ask questions, and if I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know. I think one thing we need to realise is what makes an alpaca an alpaca. In the wild, they of course would be preyed upon. They've learnt to hide illness very well. They're high altitude animals. They can cope with very low levels of oxygen. So as a general rule of thumb, if an alpaca appears not very well, it probably is much, much poorlier than your average animal. They hide it so well, you need to act straight away. So anyway, let's start off with the 5 basic freedoms that all animals should have, whether they're alpacas or anything else. They should have freedom from hunger and thirst. We should feed them properly. We should give them fresh water. We should try and keep them pain-free as much as possible. We should stop injury, disease where possible. We should allow them to express their normal behaviour, and they should be free from any form of fear or distress. Hopefully during this webinar, it'll cover a lot of things that you can do to make alpacas have the best life that they can have. Unfortunately, since I've picked up welfare, and Duncan will verify this as well, the main calls that we're getting are when the basic husbandry has gone far further than just for getting a vaccine. So we tend to get a lot of calls for animals that have found themselves on their own, animals that the friends died in the field and nobody's attended to, animals that haven't been shorn for years. And the problem with all these things is that they are the things that people notice. So, you know, by the time you notice an alpaca needs shearing, it probably has been left for 2 or 3 years. And with that, all the other husbandry has probably been left for quite a long time as well. So generally, by the time we step in, it isn't just the fact that they need shearing. They've probably not had their feet done. They've probably got overgrown teeth. They've probably got mites. They've not been wormed. They've not been vaccinated. So it's really, really hard for us from a welfare perspective to catch these animals before they go to a state that you know, there's no help from. You know, if it's visible, somebody generally will tell us that it's visible. But there's a lot of invisible stuff that these animals end up suffering purely because people don't know how to look after them. So the first thing on the basic freedoms is feeding. We need to feed these animals correctly. Do you want to share the feeding screen, Duncan? So they should always have accessible grazing. They like fresh, shorter grass generally, and they like to browse. I don't know how many of you watched your alpacas, you know, heads up in the hedgerows, liking to look for lots of different things. You know, mixed grasses, specialised alpaca grass seeds, they all add to an alpaca's enjoyment of grazing. They will spend probably 5 to 6 hours a day eating, a lot more of the day ruminating and resting. So when they are grazing, they like to be kept interesting. They like nice grass. And if you can keep it reasonably short, they will prefer it. I've just turned mine into a paddock with very long grass, and they just look at me and they're really not that interested. What I've also found is that all year round they appreciate hay. So keep your hay racks topped up all year round, soft hay, get rid of the nasty stalky bits in the hay racks. They won't eat it. I remember going out to see somebody who had got a welfare problem, and his alpacas were painfully thin and his hay racks were full, and he couldn't understand why they were breaking through fences to try and get to the haystack when they'd got hay, only to find out that hay had been in the hay rack 2 months, and because it was dry, he just thought they weren't hungry. And actually, when you looked at it, there were thick stalks of hay. They were never going to eat them. So clear your hay racks out. If you've got other animals, my horses and goats love to clean up the hay that the alpacas won't eat. But certainly the softer, nicer, sweeter meadow hay they prefer. They obviously need clean water. Keep your troughs clean, more so in the summer. I don't know what's happening everywhere at the moment when it's hot, but I quite often find an alpaca lying in a water trough, filling it with mud and making it a mess, and end up cleaning it out. But keep the water troughs clean for them because they will prefer it. There's a lot of food products on the markets that, and everybody has to make their own decisions, and they have to give the right portion size for the condition of the animal that they're feeding. Clearly, if you've got pet males that are castrated, that have got plenty of ground, their nutritional requirements are going to be very, very different to pregnant females or youngsters. And you have to do it accordingly. And where possible, feed them in appropriate groups. So, you know, if you've got a couple of young females and a couple of overweight females, try and separate them when you feed them so that you can maintain their weight. To me, there are 3 ways of feeding alpacas. You can use supplements, well known, like Camelibra and that sort of thing, which will give them all the vitamins they need, but you need to mix it with a fibre or a harder food. You can feed an extruded pellet food, which has everything in every pellet. That's the one that appeals to me most because it stops selective feeding. And unfortunately, by nature, I'm a feeder. And so feeding a small quantity supplement just doesn't work for me. I would give them too much. But what I like about the pellets is they eat the pellet. They've got everything they need in a single pellet. And you know that they've had what they need. You can also buy mueslis, which are, you know, look like your classic horse mix, which are a mixture of pellets and grains and all that sort of thing. I used to feed those because I like the smell of them and I thought they looked nice. But I did have a couple of issues with a couple of young females that were picking out the bits they like, and actually they ended up iron deficient. So I've resorted to a pellet, and that's what works for me. Everybody has to choose what works for them, and I prefer a low sugar extruded pellet. But I know a lot of people feed supplements, but my reasons are purely personal because I know what I'm like. So alpacas generally take longer to digest their food. It takes much longer to go through their gut than say a sheep or any other ruminant species. They have 3 stomachs, and effectively they have to pass through all 3 stomachs to digest their food. You will see on the fact sheet that's referred to for feeding a picture of the stomach and how they work. What I will say is we know alpacas are prone to stomach ulcers. If they're going to get a problem, it's usually in C3, which is the 3rd stomach, as things go through. In my experience, that's the only time I've ever had an ulcer with an alpaca. If you feed an extruded pellet, generally that is enough for every alpaca until we get into the winter when obviously we need extra supplements, extra quantities of vitamin A, D and E. Again, you can have it in an injectable form or an oral form. It really just depends on what suits you. I prefer injectable because I like to know it's gone in. Certainly your younger animals and your darker coloured animals have more of a need for AD&E. The reason they need it is obviously where they originally came from. They have a lot more sunshine, a lot more daylight, and they can absorb more AD&E from the sun. We don't have that here. So in the winter, it's always best to top them up. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen rickets, but you know, younger animals certainly, if their vitamin D levels are too low, they will develop rickets and it's painful for them. So if you can avoid it, try and avoid it. The other thing I would say about feeding is it's your prime opportunity to watch your animals. Watch them when they go to the trough. If little Freya is usually the first at the trough, and actually she stands back and goes, I'm not really sure I want to eat anything today. Log it in the back of your mind. You know, that animal is usually greedy. It's not being greedy today. Why isn't it greedy? If there isn't a rational reason for it, like you've just turned it onto some new grass and it might be a bit full, take a look at it. Because the one thing is with these alpacas is that the signs of anything wrong are almost imperceptible at the beginning. But if you can catch them, you can save yourself a whole lot in the long run. So,
sorry, Sue, there's
been
one question typed in about what brand of pelleted feed is it that you use? You mentioned Camelibra, but the one with pellets, which has something of everything in, what's that?
I use Aztec Silver, which is made by GLW Feeds. We buy it by the pallet because, you know, it's easier for us that way. I'm not so sure it's quite so easy to get retail, but a lot of breeders stock it. If you can find a local breeder, a lot of breeders have it by the pallet. That's the one that works for me. There is another one that's manufactured up in Scotland as well, which I think is called Camelid Complete, which is a very, very similar composition. It just fit. That's what feels best for me. But everyone has to make their own feeding decisions. And but yeah, it's Aztec Silver I use.
Thank you.
All right. So we've covered feeding and what alpacas like to eat. Now we look at shelter. It's not trying to reinvent the wheel, really. You know, there's lots of different shelters alpacas can have. As a broad statement of fact, I have found they prefer shelters with wider entrances rather than small stables. They don't like being shut in. I would rarely shut an animal in unless I was worried for its health or I was trying to keep it dry before shearing. But alpacas are used to very extreme conditions. So if it's very, very hot or very, very cold, they often won't go in. They might seek a bit of shade under a tree, but generally it's the rain they don't like. We have one rain spot at my place and they all run down the field and sit under the shelter. But I tend to find if it snows, they will sit out in the snow and the snow freezes on their backs. And you look at them and you think, oh, you poor souls, you know, you've got frozen snow on your back. When actually, the reason it's frozen on their back is because they're not losing any body heat, because their fibre is so good at insulating them, they're maintaining their own body temperature. And I think with shelters, the biggest bonus of a shelter is it's there. If they want to use it, they can use it. If they don't want to use it, they don't have to. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you're lying in bed and it's hammering down with rain, you feel a whole lot better knowing that if they want to get in, they can get in. I also like to see fields with hedges and shelter that way, because they will use natural shelter. Because I guess, you know, going back to what makes an alpaca, in the wild, they wouldn't have nice shelters. They would just have hedgerows and trees and that sort of stuff. And they're very, very good at making use of what you provide for them, and make it as welcoming and inviting as you want to. I put my hay racks in my field shelters so that they go in to have the hay. You invite them in, encourage them to go in and use them. And then if they don't want to use them, that's fine. But at least you're giving them the option. As I say, I don't think there's much need to ever lock alpacas in. I think, you know, if they're not ill and they're generally okay, just let them have a shelter. But the one thing I will say, and I'm saying this for the benefit of Emma Taylor, who has to process fibre, do not put shavings in your shelter for your alpacas to lie on, because Emma will not thank you if she has to process your fibre and it's got little bits of wood shavings in it. Nor will she thank you if it's got sand in. A lot of people use sand in barns for alpacas to go to the toilet, but it's a no-go for bedding, because, as I say, people like Emma would be quite upset if they have to process it, and it will ruin your fibre.
I've just had a question about width of doors. You know, what's the kind of minimum that you would care to see?
I would say about 6 foot at the very minimum. I tend to find your 3-4 foot stable doors, they will go in, and let's face it, they'll get used to whatever you give them. But I think if they've got a wider opening and they can see through to the back of the shelter, even if you can have skylights in them as well to make them a little bit lighter, they're much more likely to use them if they can access them through a wide open gap. So maybe about 6 foot.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going on to disease control now. And for the start of this, I'm going to share with you my opinions and what I feel. it's really, really, really important. You can do lots and lots of things to make your alpacas well, but if you haven't got a good vet that knows alpacas, you've got a problem. So when you get your alpacas, phone around the local vets. I know some of you don't have much choice and there's not a lot you can do about it, but ask the vet questions. Ask them, how much experience have you got with camelids? How many herds of camelids do you treat? Have you done any camelid specific training? And the other thing I would ask, and this is absolutely based on my own experience, have you got an in-house blood machine? Because it's really, really no good if you've got a recumbent poorly alpaca, which we'll come on to later, not to be able to run some bloods and get a result straight away. I go back to what makes an alpaca an alpaca. One of the things they do is they hide illness really well. So it's no good having a poorly alpaca, a vet coming out to take blood and having to post it to a lab and wait 4 days for the results. It's not enough. Ask your vets, see how willing they are to learn about alpacas. See if they realise that, a poorly alpaca, a dog that's a bit off colour, you'd leave for 24 hours and go, well, you'll be all right tomorrow. If an alpaca's like that, you can't leave it. And the vets need an understanding of it. And it's one of the things that I think we come up to a lot, where people, and we see it on the chat forums, they're trying to treat animals, they're doing their absolute best for their animals, but actually sometimes the vets really, really don't know what they're doing themselves. So there's a real importance to have a vet that can give you immediate results. If they can run in-house fetals as well, brilliant. If they can't, most places will do them within 24 hours for you. That's not such a big deal, but you really, really do need a vet that can look after you and know alpacas. It's really also important for disease control to have really, really good biosecurity. So, if you've got footpaths going through your field, try and fence them off. You don't want people trudging your lovely clean land that you've picked all the poo up out of the field and you've tried to have some parasite control, but actually people have walked through the next farmer's fields and they're trudging who knows what through your fields. Try and keep your footpaths fenced. Try and keep people, if they're going to walk through your land, try and keep them where they need to be. Things like TB and yonis and all that sort of stuff can be passed by other things being able to access your land. It's no good having really, really good badger fencing and all this sort of thing if people are going to walk through and just, trash everywhere. Don't ever use barbed wire or electric fence, because alpacas can't feel electric fences. They'll put their heads through, and if they've just been shorn, you might be lucky. And I know there are people that do successfully use electric fence. My experience was that I, in my naivety, had a field with some electric fence that was on, and I had a greedy female that stuck her head through the fence and unfortunately got stuck. And when I found her, she was just drawing her last breath and she was wrapped up in the electric fence. I can't think it was a very pleasant end for her, and it certainly wasn't pleasant for us to have to look at her in that state. And I learnt then, they can't feel it. The same with barbed wire. They have to be really, really into a barbed wire before they feel it. And if they get their fleece wrapped in it and pull back, they can do a whole lot of damage. So try and make your fencing appropriate to an alpaca's needs. Bear in mind that they're heavily fleeced and, they can't feel stuff when they press up against it. And try and keep them safe as much as possible. So, sorry, I'm just lost my train of thought there, sorry. Try and have some isolation facilities. If you've got an animal that's under the weather, try and have somewhere that you can actually put them away from the others, maybe with a friend. Just somewhere. All these are relative. If you're, again, only going to keep 3 animals and they're your pets, you're not going to have isolation facilities, and I understand that. But if you can have somewhere where you can remove an animal in case there's something wrong with it, and there's something wrong with it, it's always best if you can. Try and pick up your poo out of the field. Parasite eggs live in pasture for years and years and years. If you can get the poo up before the parasites hatch, you've got a good chance of controlling anything that's in your land. Check your fences regularly. Make sure there's no holes in them so that things can't get in or out. Look after your paddocks and they'll be fine for your alpacas. Keep them clean, keep your grass short, and check out for poisonous plants. There's a list on the BAS website of poisonous plants. You can go on there, you can access them, you can Google pictures of them to check whether you've got them in your fields, and you can stop your animals from eating something that's potentially toxic to them. Be life-saving in certain situations. If you've got a really big farm and you're having visitors, maybe invest in some disinfectant baths for people to walk through. I think if you're not having large-scale visitors, again, it's all pro rata and being sensible. But if you can have some disinfectant mats, I'd probably invest in some of those as well. So the last thing that we require on our 5 basic requirements is space. Try and give your animals space where they can feed separately out of separate buckets. Try and don't overstock your land. You know, 4 and 5 an acre on rough land, 5 and 6 per acre on better pasture. Try and keep the amount of animals. I know they're addictive. I know we all love them and we'd like to keep loads of them. Try and keep as many animals as you can manage on the pasture that you've got. You know, you can keep 2 on half an acre if you maintain it well. But don't be tempted to go and get another 2 because you can manage to maintain 2 on half an acre. Try and keep same-sex groups of alpacas together. Do not mix males with females. Emma and I have spent today again unpicking a mixed sex group of alpacas where, you know, they think it's okay to run entire males with females. It's not pleasant for the males. It's not pleasant for the females. You risk aborted pregnancies. You risk all sorts of problems. If you've got a large quantity of alpacas, try and keep them in same age groups as well. Keep last year's crias all together. Keep your adults all together. Keep your pregnant females in other groups. Give them space to rear their babies. And definitely, if you can and you keep stud males, try and keep them out of sight of the females. We keep our stud males further away down the drive, and they live together perfectly peacefully unless you put them in the field where they can see the females. And as nice as they are and as best friends as they are, they will fight. So if you can keep them out of sight, it's out of sight, out of mind, and they'll all live together perfectly happily. So also, if you can't keep in age groups, try and be a little bit sensible. So don't put a weaned cria in with 4-year-old males because they're all male and they'll be okay. They won't be okay. You need to let your crias get to at least semi-adults, 2 years old, before you put them in with adult males. Males more so than females. I think females are a little bit more forgiving. Clearly, again, if you've got 2 pregnant females and they have 2 female crias, you haven't got the same issue. But in large groups, they are much better kept in same sex, same age, where possible. The biggest advantage of giving alpacas space, aside from the fact that it's obviously a nice environment for them, is you cut down your parasite risk. So the more space they've got, the cleaner you can keep your pasture, the less likely you are to have a parasite problem later on. And we'll go on to parasites in a few minutes. Okay, then we'll go on to handling. So, oh, hold on, that's gone wrong.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you. So if you can, have a catch pen. Feed your animals in a catch pen so that it becomes a nice place, somewhere that they're willing to go so that they don't get stressed. how many times we've probably all done it, you run round after them trying to catch them. It's much easier if you've got a designated area where you feed them and you've got a catch pen. Just call them in when you want to do anything with them. Handle them very, very gently. Don't wrestle with them and all that sort of thing. Try and halter train them, because then when you do want to do something, you can put them on a halter and you can do it very, very easily and very calmly, except when you're trying to do a video for a bass handling forum, and then it doesn't work at all. But generally, if they're halter trained, you can put a halter on when you want to do anything with them. You can walk them when you want, but that catch pen, it has been a lifesaver for me. You just call them in, you get them in, you do what you want to do, and you let them back out. And just try and avoid stress for them. Try and make it so they don't preempt the fact they're going in a handling pen. Oh, what's she going to do to me now? And they all run around and get upset. We don't want to cause stress. We know they're prone to stomach ulcers. Try and make all your handling as stress-free as possible and as calm and as quiet as possible. Again, it's going back to, in the wild, they would be preyed upon and they would be threatened by strangers. Don't make it threatening for them when you come to handle them. Softly, calmly is the best way to handle. There's some fabulous courses you can do on handling and camelid dynamics and all that sort of stuff. And I think they're invaluable if you want to learn to handle your alpacas to your best advantage.
Question about halter training. So what's the best age to halter train?
I tend to halter train mine after I've weaned them. So I wean them, get them into their own age group, and then halter train. So, perhaps 8 months plus, really. And I like them done before they're 12 months old. I think that you've got, a perfect opportunity. The other thing I would say about halter training, and anybody that's tried will tell you this, is try and do 2 or 3 together rather than just do one on its own. They're not going to like the halter to start with. We all know, we've all seen pictures of them playing dead. But if you can have a group of them and they can go together, they're much more likely to accept it where possible. Or if you've got a really good halter trained adult that they can follow, that's always quite useful as well. Okay, we're now going to go on to body scoring. I think body scoring is probably one of the most powerful tools we have in terms of our basic husbandry, because what body scoring does is it tells you the amount of condition that animal has. If you go and weigh them, yes, you can average that, an adult will weigh about 75 kilos. It doesn't take into account the frame of that animal. So you could weigh one and go, oh no, it's 50 kilos, it's far too thin, when actually it's just much smaller frame than the others. Body scoring is a fantastic tool to be able to tell. The picture on the top of this is taken from the Bass Welfare leaflet, and it tells you exactly what they should feel when you feel them. And it's very easy when they're feeding at the top to walk past one or the other and put your hands on their back. You can do, if you've got half a dozen of them, you can do one day and just feel, and if they feel good, it's great. If you look at the top, number 3 is obviously the ideal that you would be looking for. But basically, if your fingers go in, they're on the thin side. And if as you rub your finger across the top of the spine, it goes out in a big circle, they're probably too fat. And whilst I know we all get a bit paranoid, oh, this alpaca's too thin or that sort of thing, overweight animals are as bad as underweight animals. In sometimes even worse, because they struggle to fall pregnant if you want to breed from them. It's not good on their joints. It's the same as people being overweight. If I lost 2 stone, my joints would be far better than they are. So having an overweight alpaca is as bad as having an underweight alpaca. And the other thing, of course, is if you want the fibre, the more weight they carry, the fibre is likely to go coarser. So use your body scoring, even more than weighing. I just think body scoring tells you so much. Be very, very careful when you do score, though, that you don't actually put your hand too far back and go towards the pelvis. A lot of alpacas, even if they're overweight, you will still feel what I would call the pin bones on the top of the pelvis. So make sure you do it right in the middle of the back, because that's when you'll get your most accurate assessment. And if they do start to feel a little bit skinny, it can often be an early warning sign that something is going wrong, and it gives you a chance to act before actually they get poorly. So use the body scoring, use this chart, download this leaflet and have it to hand, have it on the wall in your stable or your barn somewhere. And just as you're walking around your alpacas, put your hand across their back and see how they feel, and keep an eye on it. It's a really, really powerful tool.
I've had a couple of supplementary questions on halters, if we can just dip back for a second, which is an alpaca ever too old to make it worth halter training?
I think that sort of decision, it has to be a balanced decision based on why you want to halter train it in the first place. Is the halter training going to cause it more stress? And you try. I think the answer to that question is no, they're not. I inherited a stud male about 2 years ago who wasn't halter trained, and actually he's a big lad, and it took 8 people to get him on the shearing mat the first time because he was so wild. And we have halter trained him, and we have halter trained him successfully, but you do have to balance it against why you need to do it and the stress that it might cause that animal in halter training them. But the answer to your question is yes, of course, you can halter train anything, but you balance the choice to halter train against the disadvantages of the stress it might cause the animal.
And when you're doing your weaned cria, a very specific question, what's your regime? Is it every day, every other day?
I tend to, I think most cria, and people might shoot me down for this, can be halter trained in 7 days. If you do it every day for about 10 minutes, most of them are halter trained within 7 days. Day one, I tend to just put the halter on, put the rope on and stand there and make a bit of a fuss. And then day 2, we go into starting to walk. But I think if you're very calm and you're very kind and they've got somebody to follow, most of them, I would say, take about 7 days to halter train. You do get an odd one that takes a bit longer, but generally it doesn't take very long.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Now, parasites. This is a subject that everybody that's got camelids will have a worry about. Because they haven't been in the UK that many years, I don't think they have a natural resistance to the parasites that we have in the UK. And when we look at parasites, we don't just look at worms, we look at coccidia, we look at mites, we look at fluke. And I don't think that there are some animals that are definitely more susceptible to parasites. And I think as a breeder, you have to identify those animals and keep an eye on them. And the strangest thing I find about parasites is you can have 4 animals in a field and one of them will have a terrible dose of barber's pole and the others you'll run faeces on and they haven't got anything. But we do have to be really, really mindful, I think, with alpacas that they don't tolerate parasites well. And with their ability to hide illness, they're usually, unless you're on top of it, they've usually got quite a high burden by the time they show you symptoms. So the common ones I think that everybody sees is mites. There's 2 pictures on this PowerPoint of 2 animals. They're my animals that have got significant signs of mites. So you've got your brown male there and you can see it down his leg, and you've got the female with the bold ears. Now that female had mites as a cria, and the hair has never grown back. No matter what I've done with it, it's never grown back. You can get rid of the mites, but quite often the damage and the hair loss will stay, and it's unsightly and it's unpleasant. But there is very, very little that you can do once they've lost the hair, in my experience. Mites, if I'm going to treat mites, and this is what I do, I tend to topically spray with Frontline dog flea spray, although I believe that's out of stock at the moment. And I would use something like ivermectin injectable to treat the mites on the inside, because although if you're spraying them, you're killing the mites on the outside, you need something to kill the burrowing ones that are inside. So I would tend to treat for 3 weeks, every week, with some injectable ivermectin to get rid of them. And generally you can get rid of them. Otherwise, you need to get your vet to come and do some skin scrapings. But your classic, you know if an animal's got mites, because their hair will start to come out. They lose it around the feet, around the noses. You'll often see in crias, if the mom's got mites, you'll see that the cria will start to lose the hair around the muzzle. And that's all classic signs that mom's got mites, and probably the cria has as well. Pick them up and deal with them quite quickly. They're usually quite simple to get on top of. I would say that for me, the biggest bugbear in my world is good old EMAC, which is a form of coccidia. The picture that you can see on the bottom of the screen that looks like a little brown light bulb, that is an EMAC egg picked up on a fecal. EMAC, it's one of those dangerous coccidia. If you find normal coccidia, you tend to find that most animals can deal with that quite well. EMAC is lethal. It causes all sorts of problems. It often burrows into the lining of the stomach. It leaves holes in the stomach lining. The stomach leaks, it leaks protein out into the system, and they end up going down with kidney failure. And it's a really horrible parasite. If ever I see an EMAC on a fecal, I don't like it. And certainly very young animals with very low burdens of EMAC can't survive it. It's a nasty, nasty parasite. So run fetals, if you see something like that, jump on it straight away. On the parasite sheet, there's lots of, Doug wrote the information sheets for BAS, and he's listed all the possible treatments and products that you can use. My product of choice is Bacox. That seems to do the job, but really it's preventing them that you need to do. If you see something, jump on top of it, check everything else in that field, get that field cleaned, and if you can get the animals off the pasture for a little while, do it. And if you've got a good old horse like Ronald, as you can see in that photo, put him on the field, let him go and clean it up, because cross grazing is a really powerful tool when you want to get rid of parasites. Don't use sheep or goats because they have exactly the same parasite. The other one is the bulbous polewort, the bulbous poleworm, homuncus, that causes profound anemia. And the reason, again, that is so dangerous in alpacas is they're high altitude animals. They're used to low levels of oxygen. So they can have a very, very low red blood cell count and still appear to be perfectly well. When you run bloods on them with an animal with homuncus, you will find they have what's called a very low PCV. So their level of red blood cells is very, very low. A dog with a PCV of 15 would die. I've seen alpacas as low as 4 or 5 that are still walking around. It's a really dangerous worm. It causes really, really dangerous effects. Get yourself a thermometer chart. You can download them. Unfortunately, I couldn't find one that I could download and put on this without copyrights and things. Compare the membranes on an alpaca. If you've got one that doesn't seem quite right, have a look at the membranes and see if they look pale. It's probably barber's pole. If you have EMAC, it's really important, I would say, to have thiamine in your kit somewhere, because EMAC depletes the thiamine levels in the body. It makes animals not want to eat. Then their appetite gets worse because they're low in thiamine. Thiamine can be really, really useful in the treatment of EMAC. It's certainly one of my go-to drugs. Now, obviously, you've also got to be careful with liver fluke. It tends to affect people in wet areas. Speak to your local farmers, ask them if you're in a fluke area. It's one of the things I'm glad to say I don't have any experience of, because I've never actually had it. And now I've said that, we all know what's going to happen. If you have very dry ground, you're much, much less likely to have fluke. Again, there is a test that you can have done for it. It isn't the same test that you would have if you just run a fetal. So if somebody runs a fetal for you, there's lots of people that will run them for you. I'm pretty sure BAS have got a list of people that can run them, or certainly you can ask us or any of the chat forums if you want people to run fetal samples for you. You can even learn to do your own. But fluke is a very different test. So for alpaca fetal sampling for parasites, we use what's called a modified Stoll's test, which is a flotation test with sugar. A fluke test is a completely different test. It's a flotation. And so if you want to test for fluke, you do need to ask whoever's doing your samples to test for fluke for you, because you won't get a fluke result on a normal standard parasite test.
A question about ivermectin. Is it over the counter or is it prescription?
I've never managed to get it over the counter. Somebody might tell me different, but I usually buy it through the vets. It's not an expensive drug, actually. We use Panamec, and you can get a bottle of it. It's not expensive, and the beauty of it is it doesn't have a shelf life, so you can keep it in your cupboard forever.
Right, and then we get a series of cross grazing questions. I'll just condense them. Would cattle be okay, and would pigs be okay?
That I don't know is the answer to that question. I would imagine pigs wouldn't be appropriate for cross grazing because they rootle up the ground too much. So I'm not entirely sure you'd have much grass left at the end of it. In terms of cattle parasites, I really don't know the answer to that question.
I think I can do something on that, in that there is a fair crossover. Certainly they're fluke susceptible, and some of the other intestinal worms. So I'm not sure cattle would be different enough. Okay, right, carry on. Okay, so I think, is there any questions on parasites? Well, I think that's all at the moment. We might go back, but okay. There we go. Right. So the next thing, signs of illness. It's really unfortunate with alpacas in that the signs that they're ill are really non-specific, and they give you absolutely no help whatsoever in telling you what's wrong with them. So generally, an alpaca that's out of sorts will stay away from the rest of the herd. They usually sit down looking a bit miserable. They often go off their food or start to eat very, very slowly, and they can be depressed. They also move slowly. They sometimes look a bit hunched up. And if they're rolling and kicking at the belly, I quite like that, because at least you might know they've got colic. But their symptoms are really non-specific. So, you phone your vet and you go, I've got an alpaca and it's recumbent and it's not eating and it's staying away from the herd. Well, hey ho, we know it's ill. It doesn't actually tell you very, very much. But if you spend time with them and spot the signs and you notice it, I, for instance, had a female about 2 years ago, and I just watched her coming in to be fed, and she was a greedy animal, and she was at the end. She was really, really slow, and she came in and she was very slow eating her food, and she wasn't recumbent, and then she started eating soil. And it's noticing those imperceptible things before they become recumbent. And in answer to the question, recumbent means they sit down all the time. So they don't want to stand up and walk around. What I would say is, if you've got an animal that's showing these symptoms, they probably need to call a vet. But my first tool of choice, if I've got a recumbent alpaca and I don't think it's very well, is I get a thermometer out. So take its temperature. If its temperature's outside the normal range, right, it's either hypothermic or hypothermic, you need a vet now. If its temperature's normal, then you go on looking at your membranes, looking for signs of worms, obvious signs, has it hurt its leg, all that sort of thing.
there's a real balancing act between knowing when to call something. So use all the tools you've got. Use your thermometer, use your Fermat's scale, use your body scoring, and go through and check all those things, because at least then when you phone the vet, you can go, actually, I've taken its temperature and its temperature's 39.2, which is high. I've looked at its eye membranes, they're pink, so it probably isn't parasites, and you can get somewhere, and the vet will know what to do.
Just while we're on temperature, Sue, what would you say is the normal range?
I like something between 37.5 and 38.5, but my vet would say they wouldn't be concerned up until over 39, really.
And a practical question, how do you measure the temperature?
In exactly the same way as you would a dog, you would use a rectal thermometer. If you buy a digital one for £10 from Boots, literally press it, set the timer, and it'll give you a temperature. Keep your eye on them though, because I did actually have one once that had a temperature of 30 degrees, which was absolutely impossible, and my thermometer had broken. So do every so often, just do a test on them, preferably on an alpaca, because you don't really want to test a rectal thermometer on yourself. But yes, I think a thermometer is as a breeder is one of the biggest, most powerful tools, and it really does sometimes just tell you, actually, I need to call a vet now. This temperature's wrong. So in my experience, and this is only my experience, if you do end up with a poorly alpaca, I tend to find that most of the pen strep and penicillins aren't very effective on alpacas. Over the years, we have always resorted to two drugs called Exenel and Nuflor, which are both antibiotics. They seem to work far, far better in alpacas than any other antibiotics we've ever tried. That's my experience. At the end of the day, it's all up to your vets, but that's what I've found in the past. You also need to be really, really careful with pain relief with alpacas. So non-steroidal anti-inflammatories are not very good with stomach ulcers. So I would say to you that if you're going to give any non-steroidal pain relief for whatever reason, you need to protect the stomach from stomach ulcers right from the start by using some Protexin or some Gastrogard, Proteum. They've all got the same active ingredient. Protect the gut. If you're giving oral non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, please protect their stomachs, because you can get them well from one thing and then they get a stomach ulcer. And steroids, again, sometimes we have to use them, but they're not great for any length of time really with them. So just be really careful, because unfortunately, we seem to have gone back to parasites somehow. I don't know how that's happened. So, unfortunately, sometimes the drugs that we use end up causing other problems, but you have to balance everything, don't you? I've just had a cria that's had a fractured leg. That's an inoperable fracture, and we had to keep her out of pain. And the only way to keep her out of pain was to put her on steroids. And she had a lovely 6 weeks of life, and then got a stomach ulcer that ruptured. And no matter what we'd have done, we were damned if we did and we're damned if we don't, but we had to keep her out of pain. And unfortunately, in doing so, it caused stomach issues. But as owners, we form a balancing act, don't we? And we do what we can do, with what we've got.
That was me looking at the questions, Sue, when I flicked the slide over. I didn't mean to. I'm not sure whether this is tongue-in-cheek or not, but if a heavily pregnant alpaca is sitting down a lot, do I suspect illness, or is it near to birth?
Who knows? But if you grab yourself a thermometer and go and check its temperature, if its temperature's normal, the thing is with body temperature will only tell you if they've got some form of infection rumbling on effectively. So it's really, really useful to rule out the fact that if their temperature's normal, they probably haven't got any sort of infection going on. But I just think if anything's sitting around, it might just be heavily pregnant. If it's unshorn, it might just be hot. But if you go and take its temperature A, it might give you some reassurance, and B, it might just tell you something and you go, oh, heck, actually, this does need a vet. It takes 2 minutes to do, and all of a sudden, you know something that you didn't know before you got the thermometer out, and it might just help you sleep at night if you know everything's normal.
And could you just repeat the names of the gut protecting medicines, please?
Okay, so if you're going to use to protect the gut when you're treating them for anything, you can use oral medications. One being Gastrogard, which is a horse medication. A lot of horse people use it, and there's a new one called Proteum, which is apparently better than Gastrogard. I've not tried it yet, but the active ingredient is the same. If I was treating an animal for an ulcer, you can use exactly the same medications as those. I tend to think, and it's logic for me, if you put something oral and it goes into the first stomach, which is C1, then into C2, and then into C3, if you'd got an ulcer in C3, that product might have been broken down significantly by the time it gets into C3 and might not be as useful. So if I suspect an animal has an ulcer, I have been quite successful over the years in injecting them with Zantac or ranitidine, which is an injectable antacid. I don't think Zantac is available anymore. I think the active ingredient in it, which is ranitidine, is available. But I think if you were ever suspecting something actually had an ulcer, if you can get some form of injectable medication, it's probably the best way to go. But certainly for protection, if you're giving them drugs, give them Gastrogard or Proteum before you give them the oral medication, and it will give some form of protection from the acid in the stomach.
I just remind people that this will be available on YouTube. So if you have missed anything, especially brand names of products, then you will be able to scroll through and find it on the YouTube recording. Right.
Also, keep a first aid kit. So get yourself some purple spray. I now know what purple spray is. 16 years later, I don't actually know what it is. A thermometer. Get yourself a bottle of thiamine. Get yourself a bottle of injectable phosphorus. Have your vitamin A, D and E, paste or injectable, because even if it's the summer, if you suspect something's got rickets, you've got it there. But be really, really careful with your dosage with A, D and E, because giving too much is as bad as not giving any at all. But get yourself a first aid kit and get yourself some tools to do the job, you know, and you knowledge is powerful. So certainly when you're dealing with a poorly alpaca, knowledge is very powerful. Okay, vaccinations. As with wormers, any drug, any antibiotic, nothing is licensed for use in alpacas. Everything that is used off license. So your vet needs to prescribe your vaccines, or your vet will have to prescribe antibiotics. Wormers, everything is used off license. There are not enough alpacas in the UK for the drug companies to be bothered to license a lot of these products at the moment. Who knows when it will happen, but just bear in mind, everything is used off license. With vaccinations, we use sheep vaccines. Probably the same with wormers, actually. We tend to use sheep dose or double sheep dose with wormers. And with vaccines, my protocol is that cria are vaccinated twice with Lamivac as crias. Once they become yearlings, they go on to Covectin 10. But you have to start another course. That was touched on actually by the vet that did the birthing course. If anyone wants to sort of catch up with vaccine protocols, she did a really good presentation on the birthing webinar in terms of dosage. But basically, if you do Lamivac when they're crias, you need to do a double course of vaccine the second year of your Covexin, and then once a year after that. They protect against certain things that alpacas do get, certain things we don't know if alpacas get, but they're the best we've got. Now, Tim Hay, I've shared this health protocol with Tim's permission. This is a really, really brilliant document that any of you could print off for any of your animals. It tells you what to use, when, and on what animals. It's a really, really clear, easy to read format. Obviously, if you've got 3 animals, a page in your diary will do. It's all about balance. But if you've got quite a few animals, this is a really, really useful document. He's quite happy. It's on his website. You can download it. You can put your own animals on it. It's in the public domain. He's quite happy for anyone to use it. But for anyone who wants to know who to do what and when, this document is really, really useful. And if I thought I could do any better, I'd have tried to write you one, but I can't. So Tim's is brilliant. So go on to Inca Alpaca's website and download it if you want to, with his permission. Okay, toenail trimming. Well, this is when you were going to get a fabulous video of my daughter and I and our well-trained alpaca, which went rather wrong. You can see from these pictures, 2 very clear, messy toenails and one nice tidy one down the bottom. Check your alpaca's feet. Even if they look okay, pick them up and have a look underneath. So, don't just look at the front and go, oh, your toenails look okay. A lot of alpacas with very straight, normal toenails will wear the toenails down themselves, and you don't have too much worry about it. When you look at this one here with this curly nail, that would want attention very, very regularly. You can see that will almost grow into his leg if you don't watch it. I trim using sheep nail clippers, and you try and get this lovely triangular shape that they've got on the hoof on the bottom right. So you trim round the edges and tidy them up. I would say, in my experience, that lighter animals tend to grow more toenail length than darker coloured animals. I'm assuming it's something to do with fleece growth and pigmentation. But keep your eye on their toenails. If they break a nail or they get really long and talon-like, like this white one, they can get caught in things, caught in fences. A ripped out toenail, as we all know, is extremely painful. So check them regularly, trim them where you can, get them used to, from really young youngsters, just having their feet picked up, having their toenails fiddled around with, a quick look, and then they'll behave themselves, and you can make a nice toenail trimming video rather than me try and do it. So that's pretty much all I've got to say on toenails, really, I think. Is there any questions?
Yeah, sorry, I had myself on mute. One question on toenails was, if a pregnant female, heavily pregnant female, is distressed by toenail trimming, but it needs toenails trimmed, what should I do?
Work out when the shearer's coming, because if the shearer's coming and she's going to be shorn, I'd probably just hang on. Again, it's balance, isn't it? I think everything we do as breeders and farmers or pet owners, it's about balancing the benefits against the negatives. So if you've got a female and her toenails are really bad and they're growing into the back of her foot and they're going to cause her pain, then actually it's worth stressing her to trim that toenail. If they're just a bit long and they don't look great and she's due to give birth in a month or be shorn in a month, I would be inclined to leave it. So heavily pregnant animals don't need to be stressed, and they certainly don't need to be throwing themselves around and risking uterine twists and all that sort of stuff. If it's really, really bad and you really think it needs doing, fight the battle. If not, leave it until it gives birth. A little bit of an overgrown toenail like that white one in the last picture is not going to be life-threatening. A uterine twist or a good head smack on the floor or something is life-threatening. So balance your decisions with the advantages. Okay, so shearing. This is one of the bugbears in my life. From the minute you shear your alpacas, they start to grow a fleece for next year. Every single year we get loads and loads of people going, does anybody know any shearers? If you breed alpacas and you're going to sell them to people, print off the shearers list off the BAS website, give it as part of your handover pack, use all these leaflets that are on Alpacapedia as well, but try and make shearing easy for new buyers, because it is certainly, and I'm sure Duncan will agree with me on this, it's the thing that we get most calls about is, you know, these alpacas, you can't see them anymore because they've got so much fleece. They need to be shorn annually. Surreys obviously need to be shorn every 2 years, but those fleeces need to come off. We know that they're breathable. We know that, you know, they can regulate the body temperature, but 3 years of fleece that's turned to felt is heavy. You don't know what's underneath it. And it can potentially be life-threatening. There could be all sorts of things going under. And also, this is a crop. You know, alpacas are fleece producers. Even if you don't want to do anything with your fleece yourself, at least take it off for the animal's comfort. They're not overly prone to fly strike like other species, but they can get it. And it's a brilliant opportunity when you shear to have a look what's underneath, to see what's going on with your animals. And primarily, it is a welfare issue. They need to come off. If you've got an older animal and it hasn't grown much fleece, and you think it's going to be cold in the winter, just shave around the edges, leave a bit of a blanket on the back, or leave, you know, a thinner layer on, just take the top layer off, but get that fleece off. So book your shearer early. Don't be afraid to ask your shearer what he needs. What does he need for shearing date? Do you need to supply him with power? I mean, you know, this picture of Emma, she's she's boarded the floor, he's got his power, it's all clean. You know, there's a mat there ready to collect the fleece. But whatever you want to do with that fleece, get it off your animal, get your shearer booked, speak to him. If you're not comfortable and you think his practices aren't going to be great, don't have that shearer. Phone Duncan, message one of us. You know, we'll try and find you a local shearer, but there is a list on them, and it really is a priority to get these fleeces off. Book them early. If you're happy with them, book them again for the next year, because it's one of the things that alpacas really do need. Don't, if you use, I don't know how many of you use dichotomous earth. That's another great treatment for mites. If you put them in their dust bath, don't use anything like that a month before shearing, because again, it clogs the clippers up and it's not very good for the fibre. So be careful what you use, and think about what you want to do with your fleece. So if you do want to process it, you know, have your bags ready, get everything labelled, get it weighed, take your fibre samples. You know, I think so many of us, certainly when I started shearing, this shearer turned up with these funny shackles. I hadn't got a clue what he was going to do to my alpacas. And I had a load of bin bags and no labels, and I didn't know I had to sort the fibre. And it all went in the skip because I hadn't got a clue what I was doing about it. Ask people, you know, decide what you want to do with your fibre. If you want to bin it, that, I know Emma will cringe at me, that's your choice. But be prepared for that shearer, and more importantly, get him booked.
Emma has just sent me a little note which says 2 year shearing is fine, but fleeces can get too long to comfortably process, so you need to bear that in mind for your Surrey fleeces. So just, you know, like you've just said, Sue, it depends what you want to do with it, but you need to think that it's possible to get too long to process comfortably.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, you do get some alpacas that have really, really fluffy heads. They're beautiful. In between shearing, make sure the fleece doesn't go over their eyes. It can cause, it certainly makes AD&E deficiency a little bit worse, but also fleece blindness is terrible. They start walking into things. I mean, I had one a few weeks ago and I looked at her and thought, oh, you've got a bit of fleece over your head. And I said to my daughter, can you just come and help me catch nutmeg? Because I don't really think she can see where she's going. Her fleece is too much. And I put my arm out to catch her and she ran straight into me because she couldn't see me. So, you know, if their fleece is growing heavily over the eyes, obviously don't trim the lashes, but trim all round the eye so that at least they can see. They might look a bit ridiculous for a few weeks, but that's better than being blind. Okay, I'm just going to sum it up and you'll see my little pun at the bottom, spend time every day, it keeps the vet away. The one thing I can't stress enough, you can do all the brilliant husbandry in the world, spend time with these alpacas, learn what they do, learn what is normal for them. You know, if little Lucy is always last to the trough, that's fine. She can always be last to the feeding trough. But actually, if Fiona is always first at the trough and she's last, there might be something wrong. Watch them, watch who's sitting on their own. Just spend time with them. If their behaviour is normal for them, that is fine. If they are acting out of character, there might be something wrong. And act faster than you would with any other species of animals. Don't think, oh, is it, isn't it? Do something. Even if you only get that beloved thermometer out, just do something. They're lovely animals. It's no hardship to go and stand over the fence and spend some time with them, watching them and making sure they're behaving normally. And actually, you know, it's better than doing the washing up, isn't it? I often go out and say, I need to go and check my alpacas, especially when there's a sink of washing up. It's a great excuse, but give them your time and you'll avoid an awful lot of potential problems. Are there any more questions?
Good stuff. Well, I'll just yak on for a second or two to give people a chance. We haven't got any chat questions just looming. Oh, here's one popped in. Any tips on how I need to prepare, because our first cria is due tomorrow?
Get plenty of tea bags and go and sit in the field. It might be due tomorrow. I will tell you if it's due tomorrow. It won't be born tomorrow because alpacas never do anything on time. Just keep your eye on your female. Make sure she's behaving normally. If you think she's going into labour, keep an eye on her. Generally, you'll get up and just find a cria in the field, I'm afraid. It's lovely to watch them birth, but most of the time they do it when you're not watching. Just when you trot off to go to Tesco's or something, you'll come back. My first one was born this year. I had 10 minutes to go to the doctors and back for a COVID vaccine, and I had one give birth. So, but just enjoy it. Try not to worry about it. That Mother Nature's a good beast when she gets things right. You know, we all see on all these forums when things go wrong and this is going wrong. We don't see all the good things, and 90% of things go all right, and it's nice and it's lovely to watch.
So had another one pop up saying, have you got any recommendations for alpaca coats? And if I just sort of extend that slightly to say, and when might be the right time to use a coat?
Okay, well, if you have a cria born and it's cold and wet and miserable, put a coat on them. They certainly don't regulate the body temperatures very, very early in life. So have a coat. I have two coats because you'll probably need one to wash and one to wear. If you get an older animal and you've just shorn it and you think it's a bit cold, have an adult coat. Again, it's about having tools, isn't it? If you've got coats, you won't need them. But if you haven't got them, you're bound to have one that does need them. If they're cold and they're shivery, if you take the temperature and the body temperature's a bit low, put a coat on them and see if it works or not. Mary Roach used to make some really, really fabulous cria coats, and they were stuffed with alpaca fibre, and they would always be my go-to coat. Although I think she's not very well at the moment, so I'm not entirely sure if you can still get them. Somebody could correct me on that. There's a couple of alpaca websites that sell coats. I'm not sure if Osmonds do. Alpaca and Llama Care, I think they sell them. But a good small dog coat is actually just as useful. I've certainly resorted to dog coats when I haven't been able to get anything else.
I've just had a message pop up that says Mary is posting me a Korea coat tomorrow. So
there you go then. Mary's still fine. Mary Roaches are fabulous. I have to say, they're really good coats.
Well, that's good news all round. Okay, so it's mostly people saying thank you very much and sorry I've got to go. So I'll give it one last call for any questions. We've been going for about an hour and a quarter, so Sue's probably ready for a G&T or whatever her tipple is.
Glass of Coke.
Okay then. Yeah, I think that's it for questions, Sue. Thank you very much indeed, and that was really good to get such a good canter through all those different areas. And as you say, it's your experience, but that's the joy of this sort of approach, isn't it? People can share their experiences, and if you pick up one or two little pointers that help you in the future, then it's been worthwhile. So thanks very much, Sue. Thanks very much, all you loyal listeners. And I'm sorry we can't be more interactive, but thanks for, I know some of you have done every session. This has been recorded, so I will post it up on YouTube tomorrow and put the link in the newsletter and on the chat forum so that you can go back over it at your leisure if you wish to. So apparently the Zoom way to say thank you now is jazz hands. So thanks, Sue, and good night, everybody, and hopefully see you all somewhere soon. Thanks a lot.